Fans, breaking news. The New York Mets have not only acquired an outfielder, but they've landed the exact player that I've heard hundreds upon hundreds of Mets fans saying to me, Wardy, stop talking about Luis Robert. The Mets aren't going to land him. They'd be crazy to go after Luis Robert. They'd be crazy to make such a thing happen. I have been calling for Luis Robert to the Mets for 3 effing years, including his breakout 2023 stint there where he looked like an MVP caliber player as a 5-tool talent for those White Sox. The Mets, after balking at the trade deadline as they were asking a Kane's ransom, not just Mark Vientos, they wanted Jonah effing Ton. All it took was for that $20 million to hit for the 2026 season. The Mets obviously don't want to pay that contract unless they're giving pennies in return, and the Mets give up Luis Angel Acuna and an outside of top 30 prospect for Luis Robert. This is, as David Stearns of the absolute, I don't even know the right word to put it, other than that this is a complete fleece job by the New York Mets. For as much as Luis Robert needs to bounce back naturally as a player, what the Mets just gave up for him was literally pennies. Literally nothing. They gave up nothing and landed their starting center fielder who can play all aspects of the outfield. Yes, this move more than likely means Cody Bellinger's probably going back to the New York Yankees, as much as I would have loved Belly. However, it doesn't mean that the Mets are done making moves. They're going to be adding for pitching. They may still add another bat and see what their configuration is going to look like. But breaking news live in real time, everybody. The Mets have traded for Luis Robert. And I want to see your live reactions in the live chat and the comments down below. Shout out to a little birdie. They know exactly who they are. I was relayed earlier tonight to make sure that I'm standing pat and ready to go to any breaking news that could happen. I didn't know what it was going to be. It wasn't Bellinger. I was like, okay, then what is it going to be? And bam, here we have it. Luis Robert is going to now be a New York Met. And I'm amped up because if you guys have been paying at all attention to what I've been breaking down with Luis Robert, he's such a prime bounce back candidate. And now he's going to finally be in a deep lineup. He's finally going to be with an organization that actually is trying to build to not only be a playoff contender, but hopefully a World Series type contender as soon as next season. And I completely understand, again, Luis Robert doesn't have the most sexy numbers as you guys see down below, but I'm telling you, this is a player that has all the makings in a deep lineup with elite defense, elite base running, playing with Soto on Lindor. If you don't think Luis Robert is going to find his game again, I have a bridge to sell you because the ceiling is through the roof with a player like this. The floor is what we've seen, but even with the floor being what it's been each of the past 2 years, which is below league average as a batter, what is also true is that Robert's base running is so significant that he's going to be stealing 40 plus bags for the Mets next year. What's also significant is that even if there is a world where Robert doesn't pan out the way that you were hoping, you can platoon him. Why? He batted right around 20% above league average against southpaw pitching this past season. He has literally all the makings of what the Mets have been in the market for. They want a versatile, unbelievably defensively sound defender. When Robert cares, he's one of the best 5-tool athletes in baseball. And it's insane that the Mets finally have him in their grasp, because this is a player that if you guys have been following the platform, I have talked about verbatim for at minimum the past 3, if not north of 4 years now. I initially viewed him as a pipe dream. I'm like, there's not a chance the White Sox are going to trade Robert after his amazing 2023 season. There's no shot it's going to happen. But now, after back-to-back seasons where Robert's health has not been exactly what you want, that's why he only had 110 games this past season and had a smaller sample size in 2024, if I'm not mistaken. And yes, Robert's bat has fluctuated mightily. This is a guy that's so feast or famine with his offensive approach. But this is why now bringing in Troy Snicker, the Mets' new hitting coach, who is a longtime hitting coach in Houston that ended this past season, is going to bode them unbelievably well. And pairing that with finally, and I cannot emphasize this enough, the Mets finally are now in a position where they bring in a player that is not only a bounce back candidate, but has always had the writing on the wall. When you supplement what the Mets have lost by bringing in a player like Robert, he's already a massive, clear upgrade in what you're getting over Tyrone Taylor in center. So now the Mets can go into next season, should they wish, with their top prospect in Carson Bench commanding left field, with Luis Robert in center and Juan Soto in right. The ceiling is so much greater in center than what we had each of the past couple of years under David Stearns, and the floor is nothing worse than what we've already gotten in Tyrone Taylor, okay? When it comes down to focus, when it comes down to mentality, everybody, when it comes down to a player that it's actually going to get motivated, there's no easier and greater way for the Mets to get a player now newly motivated than Luis Robert going from sorry Southside Chicago, a White Sox team that in his 2023 season, his breakout season with just under 40 home runs, elite defense, elite base running, even in that season, they were just a 500 ball club, okay? So this is a Luis Robert that doesn't know success if it smacked him across the face. And because of that, regardless of the dollars that he is now making, as he's making 20 mil AAV heading into next season, yes, that's a lot of money, but the Mets don't care, and here's why. They're getting him when he still has a couple years of club control. That is full club control, mind you, and you're bringing a player now where his ceiling in this type of lineup is so pronounced. I'm ecstatic. This is a move that I've been wanting for a very long time. Obviously, I would have loved Cody Bellinger, and I really do hope Cody Bellinger happens, but by no means do I expect Cody Bellinger to now happen at this point in time. The writing's on the wall. The Mets got their outfielder. Maybe they add one more, to be determined on that front, but I can only imagine how satisfied David Stearns is to not only get this move done, but to get it done for literally nothing. Do you guys see beside me what the Mets just gave up? They literally gave up Luis Angel Acuna, who had 5 times the amount of home runs in the winter ball for Venezuela this year versus what he had in the regular season. And who is that? Oh yeah, Truman Pauly? Who's Truman Pauly? You know it's a good deal when I don't even know who Truman Pauly is on the back of my hand as someone who covered Mets prospects all year long from low A all the way up to AAA Syracuse. So the Mets gave away a no-name prospect, nothing personal, Truman, but I'm to see to believe it if you're going to blossom into anything. And Luis Angel Acuna, who had literally no role, no fit in this organization whatsoever. It's nothing personal against Acuna, but the Mets farm has gotten 3 times greater since Acuna and Drew Gilbert arrived at the 2023 trade deadline, everybody. One from the Raiders, one from the Astros. Drew Gilbert was traded in that deal for Tyler Rogers, which we don't like in hindsight, but now Luis Angel Acuna, who I wish the absolute best to and how he will perform there now in Southside Chicago, is no longer part of the mix. But seriously, out of any and every type of move that the Mets could have made for an outfielder this offseason, this is exactly why I've been telling you guys for so long, Robert, don't be surprised if it happens. The Mets did everything in their power to try to land Robert at this past year's trade deadline. And the only simple reason as to why that did not happen was because the White Sox, being the schmucks as they've been, have been asking for a literal Cane's ransom for each of the past 2+ trade deadlines that Robert has been made available. And I understand, Robert was batting really good leading into the trade deadline this past season. He was batting 20+% above league average against Southpaws. He was looking really, really solid. There were things to be excited about with someone like him. But then naturally, they held on to him. He fell off a cliff a little bit in the second half, and that was that, everybody. So breaking live news as you guys first chime in, hit that like and subscribe on WardyNYM. The Mets have officially traded for outfielder Luis Robert, who on the same day the Mets officially announced that Bo Bichette is now a New York Met on a 3-year, $126 million contract. He will have his presser tomorrow, right around 1 p.m. Eastern, that you guys can see here. It'll be on SNY and the Mets socials. Literally an hour or two after we find out that news on Bo Bichette being official, this news happens. So naturally, the Mets were waiting for the official to get done in the case of Bo Bichette before they were able to make this move happen. It was perfect timing. I literally was relayed to be on the lookout. Something's going to happen here as soon as Bo became official. But I thought it was going to be Cody Bellinger. And then the person I was interacting with, they know exactly who they are, literally said, it's not Bellinger. And I'm like, what do you mean it's not Bellinger, but it's happening soon? And I'm thinking right away, okay, it's going to be a starter, right? The Mets, we're going to announce that we're trading for a starter. That would make a lot of sense. Or we're going to sign a starter. No, it's Luis Robert, in which there has been no rumblings of the past couple of weeks. Have you guys noticed the trend here? With the exception of Will Salmon's piece with The Athletic that we just saw over the past 48 hours, mentioning Robert obviously as a trade fit, with that exception, he was just in the mix as one of various players to essentially keep an eye out for. We really didn't see a lot of buildup with Robert as of late, the way that things were so hot on Kyle Tucker and, of course, Cody Bellinger. And I understand going from a player like Kyle Tucker all the way down to someone like Luis Robert, apples and oranges, not the same thing. And I'm not trying to sell you that, Luis Robert is the best thing since sliced bread. However, what I am trying to say is that even though the Mets did not land Kyle Tucker, and I'm probably not going to land Cody Bellinger, I think he's going back to the Yankees at this rate, barring changes. We'll see what happens, obviously, because anything can happen here. There's still room to have Robert and Bellinger with this team. and of course still get creative and give playing time for Carson Bench, because you could just give Bellinger more reps at first base, put Polanco to DH, and have Carson handle center, handle left, while Robert handles center and Soto's in right. But regardless, the Mets adding Bo Bichette allowed this versatility where they didn't necessarily need to bring in a guy like Tucker. And now that they brought in Bichette, they brought in Robert, they have more moves that they absolutely need to do, and we're going to talk about this, everybody. But let me just enlighten each and every one of you. For those that don't know Luis Robert and his game, let's talk about this for the next couple minutes. We're also going to get to your donations, and we'll get to your comments. We will get to all of them, I pinky promise. But all I ask out of the north of 3,000 you guys watching live at a replay right now, please smash that like and subscribe button on your way in. For all things Mets coverage, in season, off season, we have you covered. We're the #1 hub here on YouTube for a reason. That's thanks to your continued support night in and night out. And once we hit 38,000 subscribers, we're giving away a brand new jersey. And I'll tell you right now, that jersey can be Luis Robert if you want it. We just gave away a Bo Bichette Mets jersey and our Bo Bichette breaking news signing. I'm not doubling down and doing it for Robert right now just because I'm a broke boy and I can't just be throwing out these north of $200 jerseys like it's nothing. But I promise, not long after we hit 38,000 subscribers, we'll do that jersey giveaway. So make sure you're on the lookout for it, everybody. Thank you kindly for hitting those buttons. Shout out to our amazing sponsor here that you guys know plenty, that being, of course, at Sleeper, that has you covered for all things sports fantasy. But we'll get into them a little bit later on in this one. All right, guys and gals, let's break down Luis Robert and let's fill you guys in case you guys have not been paying attention. That's what Wardy's here for. Papa Wardy's here to break down what you guys need to know about this player. And Luis Robert, as we know, began his career in 2020 as a 22-year-old, and in the 2020 season, in 56 games, had 11 home runs, 33 runs scored, 31 RBIs, a 233 average, a 302 on base, and a 436 slug. That's good for 99 WRC plus, so right around league average as a batter. Then we get to the 2021 season for Luis Robert, and what do we see? 13 home runs, 42 RBIs, 43 RBIs and 42 runs scored actually in 68 games, 6 stolen bases, a 338 average, a 378 on base, a 567 slug, good for 55% above league average as a batter. Literally out of nowhere, Luis Robert in his sophomore season, in a small sample size, mind you, put up absurd numbers, giving you a taste of what very well could be a dominant outfielder there in Southside Chicago. In 2022, for Luis Robert, this is where it started to pick up steam even greater. In 98 games and 401 plate appearances, Robert had 12 home runs, 54 runs scored, 56 RBIs, 11 stolen bases, a 284 average, a 319 on base, and a 426 slug, good for 11% above league average as a batter. 2023 arrives, and this is where everything changes. And yes, this is an anomaly of a season, so please do not think that the Mets just traded for a guy that will give us 40 home runs next year. The exciting thing is that his ceiling is a 40 home run hitter, so that's the good thing about a move like, so to give greater context, bringing in someone like Luis Robert for the Mets is a guy whose floor isn't as bad as Jose Siri, but isn't much greater than what you're getting in Tyrone Taylor, but his ceiling is 5 times greater than any of those players that we're talking about, okay? Because the 2023 season, and what was a 500 season for the White Sox, they were not great, but not terrible either. They were, again, around league average when looking at wins and losses right around even keel. In 145 games, the only time that Robert has ever played that many games in his entire career, 595 plate appearances, 38 home runs, 90 runs scored, 80 RBIs, 20 stolen bases, a 264 average, a 315 on base, an absurd 542 slug, good for 29% above league average, and that was a 5-WAR season per Fangraphs, from elite offense to the elite defense, because you also see the 20 stolen bags, and the stealing bags has only gotten better for Robert. So if you guys don't think the Mets are going to be running on everybody next year, I got a bridge to sell you. The players they're bringing in are most certainly going to help in that regard. Robert is the latest example of exactly that, and he may not be done when it comes to bringing in guys that can bring levels of speed. The 2024 season for Robert is where it was a slice of humble pie, dealing with injury, only playing 100 games of 425 plate appearances, down to 14 home runs, 47 runs scored, 35 RBIs, 23 stolen bases, but a 224, 278, 379 clip, not great, 84%, so he was right around, 15, 16% below league average as a batter, and that was essentially the same exact thing that happened this season. Played 10 more games, 14 home runs, 52 runs scored, 53 RBIs, a 223 average, a 297 on base, a 364 slug, good for 84 on the WRC plus. So you're looking at a player that's fallen from grace massively when we look at Luis Robert and the upside that it brings. Robbie, thank you for the donation. I'll get to that shortly. And to simply answer, though, yes, I do think Belly's going back to the Yankees at this rate. I don't think the Mets are going to invest as much as maybe what we were initially hoping for Bellinger, because he's probably going to get more of the years that he's looking for with the Yankees and what the Mets are willing to do. And I don't blame the Mets for not wanting to give Bellinger the years. That's the biggest deterrent away from him. However, I think we could all agree, for as great as the ceiling is with Robert, the Mets need another bat here, okay? Because I'm still not comfortable heading into next season with how their offense is currently configured. They have to add at least one more bat that can platoon time at DH and first base, because they're probably not going to have Mark Vientos on this roster. They're probably going to trade Brett Baty unless he really becomes their super utility weapon, so to be determined on that front. But this lineup is still one bat away, in my opinion, from really having me feeling fairly comfortable heading into this upcoming season. I'd love to know if you guys feel the same or differently. But okay, Luis Robert, each of the past 2 years, has not been a league average batter. He has not been that guy. However, he has been that guy in sample sizes, as I mentioned. When we look at his ability to dominate against southpaw pitching, that's notable. And the Mets find themselves in a little bit of a predicament with Robert, where let's see, hypothetically, things don't go as planned with him, right? Let's play devil's advocate for the Mets fans out there that have been so pessimistic on pursuing a player like him. And let's say that he continues to play well below league average. Like, let's say that even though he has a change of scenery, he's in a deeper lineup, he's seen more pitches to hit, he still is not that guy. And that hypothetical, where Robert is not the guy the Mets were hoping that they were trading for initially, then you would go about platooning Robert. And that's the beauty about this, is because even if, say, he's more at his floor versus his ceiling, his floor should still be a player that the Mets platoon with, of course, getting a good amount of reps because of his great defensive value, but also his offensive upside fluctuates quite a bit. Utilize him more against southpaw pitching and then go from there. Again, for what the Mets just gave up for Luis Robert, there's really no way that they can lose this trade, if I'm being completely transparent. The only way that happens is if somehow, some way, Luis Angel Acuna becomes literally the best player imaginable, like the best player since sliced bread that we've seen. And I just don't foresee that's going to happen here when we evaluate someone like him. I really think that the Mets have landed a player that's been dying to leave Chicago to get out of Southside, that's been wanting to have a good reason to finally be motivated and get up each day. And even though I understand that $20 million for the 2026 season doesn't hurt in that regard when it comes to his motivation, it's only going to bode well and help him greater knowing that he's now with a club that has championship aspirations. All right, guys, just double checking on all the info here. The Mets will pay the $22 million guarantee left, $20 million 2026 salary plus a $2 million bonus. Yep, as I stated, everybody, this is why the Mets won this trade, because they're taking on his entire contract. So yes, his $22 million or $20 million is going to have an absurd hit on the Mets when you look at taxation, right? The taxation is going to hit the Mets at a tax of 110%. So they're spending absurd money to bring this player in. So thankfully, that's in part why they gave up literally little to no assets to make it happen. But what this also tells you is that the Mets are really buying in to Luis Robert. The reason why I'm so optimistic about this is not just because of everything that I just relayed to you guys, but it's also the common sense fact that if the Mets were doing everything in their power to land Robert at the trade deadline, the Mets have been linked to Robert each of the past 2 seasons. Don't you think there's viable reason for it? Because for the fans out here that genuinely believe that Luis Robert is not a good pickup for this organization, you're the same exact kind of fan that would compliment and say, oh, what a good move, low risk, high reward by the Philadelphia Phillies for bringing Luis Robert, who they have tried desperately to trade for each of the past 2.5 years. The LA Dodgers have heavily pursued Robert each of the past 2 seasons, but they've swung and missed because, again, they had such a high asking price in hopes that Robert could get back to that 2023 breakout campaign. The problem for the White Sox is when you put up literal pardon my French, kiddos, when you put up dog shit of a surrounding cast for a player that's coming off of a breakout season, common sense tells you they're going to fall from grace and they're not going to be that player again. So between the lack of health for Robert and the lack of consistency, this is what's cultivated the Mets to now be in a position where they were able to land him without quite literally giving up anything that they're going to lose sleep over. So you don't only see the Robert highlights beside me, which exemplifies great defense, including this nice diving catch there against his Kansas City Royals. Quality stuff there by Robert. But let's break down a bit more on his metrics here, everybody, because like I said, there are things to like and there are things not to like. And I'm not going to go out of here and try to tell you guys that you should expect Robert to be the best player imaginable for the Mets next season. What my goal is in this show tonight is for everyone to understand the floor, the ceiling and why the Mets made this move. It's as simple as that, because I get questions all the time from you guys saying, Wardy, this doesn't make sense. Why would they go after this player? You know, literally I had so many of you guys in my comments saying, oh, the Mets aren't going to sign Devin Williams. Oh, the Mets aren't going to go after Luke Weaver. Oh, the Mets aren't going to land Luis Robert. I'm like, guys, literally, what's the point of making these comments when you don't have a clue what you're talking about? At least when I'm wrong, I'll own up and say I'm wrong. 1 and 2, I'll say that at the end of the day, this is a business. Anything can happen regardless of what I've been relayed or not. I'm just grateful that what I was relayed this evening was accurate. I was told that a move was going to happen. I was literally on the verge of breaking down a video regarding Cody Bellinger in the latest, and I was told, do not record that video. And I said, okay, I will not do it. I will listen to you, and that held true. So as you guys can see beside me is Luis Roberts' baseball savant numbers here. And as we see, 87 percentile in fielding rim value, 76 and base running value, around league average in most offensive metrics until we get to his approach at the plate. And this is what Troy Snitker is going to be doing a really, really good job, hopefully, fingers crossed, and getting right with this man's offensive approach, because it's fallen off a cliff each of the past 2 years. When it comes to off-speed and breaking pitches, Robert has not done it well at all. He's in the 44th percentile in xWOBA, 43rd in expected batting average, and for context for people that are unaware, Baseball Savant, which is what I'm referencing beside me, has MLB percentiles from 1 to 100. If you're in the 100th percentile for statistic, you're the best in baseball. If you're in the 1st percentile for statistic, you're the worst in baseball. So as we break it down now, 44th in xWOBA, 43rd in expected batting average at 246, so that's better than his initial 223 line that you see down below. His expected slugging was actually above league average, so that tells you he had some bad luck this past season with a 426 on the expected instead of 364. That's a significant jump in the expected numbers, which tells you that this is why teams have liked Robert, and he's only entering his age 28 season. The upside is so through the roof with a player like this. That's why I'm so ecstatic about it. 60th percentile in barrel percentage, 42nd in average exit velocity, 42nd in hard hit percentage, 55th in sweet spot percentage, 92nd in bat speed, 8% in squared up, 20% in chase percentage, 9% in whip percentage, 19th in K percentage, and 62nd in walk percentage. The fact that Robert is somehow, some way, above league average with his walks when he swings and misses as much as he does is beyond me. Weiss's belly is still in play for the Mets. I'll have to see it to believe it. I'll tell you this much. As much as I want Bellinger, I'll be a lot more taken back if the Mets land him. I really think he's going to go back to the Yankees at this rate, but I really hope that this is kind of a reverse psychology thing where it actually still comes to fruition in the end. I would love nothing more than to find out as soon as tomorrow, breaking news, the Mets have signed Cody Bellinger to like a 4-year, $170 million contract. I would be ecstatic about that, because you can, realistically, land Bellinger and land Robert. I've been saying it all along. It makes a lot of sense for the Mets to still go down that kind of route, to land Bellinger and add another outfielder that's more of a defensive certainty than an offensive certainty. However, what I will say is that if the Mets do not land Bellinger, this is a clear sign as to why. You know, the Mets feel that they're comfortable where they're at with their offer. They don't want to go long-term. If Bellinger goes back to the Yanks, he, of course, will accept 5 years or more there to go back to the Bronx. So to be determined on that front. I'm not saying it's impossible that the Mets bring in Bellinger. I'm just saying it's not something that I'm anticipating at this point in time. Thank you for the donations, everybody. Mets are still in on Bellinger. We'll talk about it, absolutely. They're just reiterating what we know. I don't think that they really know anything more than what I've known and what we kind of have known to this point, but we gladly will talk more on Bellinger. We'll talk more on those players tomorrow for each and every one of you, I promise. But here's what I really want to amplify when we break down Luis Robert and his game, everybody, and I promise I'll get to those donations as soon as I'm done rapid-firing my initial live reaction in this one. It's the following: 93rd percentile in outs above average, 63rd in arm value, right around league average in arm strength, and folks, sprint speed is in the 90th percentile. So just think of it this way. You're getting the defensive and base running attributes that Tyrone Taylor has. His TT is fantastic with his base running as well as his elite glove. We both know that'd be true. So imagine the defense that comes with Tyrone Taylor. Elite defense, far from a liability. That's what you want in your center fielder especially. Now pair that with a bat that instead of it looking at a Tyrone Taylor bat, we're looking at a bat whose floor will probably be at least 20 home runs for the Mets next year, as long as he can play 130 games and give you probably 65 to 75 RBIs, right around league average, if not slightly above league average. And the ceiling is a player that thrives in a deep lineup with Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor, Jorge Polanco, Bo Bichette, and whoever else the Mets may land, getting more pitches to hit because he will be one of the weaker links in the Mets lineup. And in doing so, he will go on to have a 35 to 40 home run season, north of 100 RBIs. That is best case scenario, and that's the ceiling we're looking at. But the beauty about talking about ceiling regarding a player is that we're not talking about a player that hasn't done it before. We're talking about a guy who's 2 seasons removed from being that type of profile. And when you look at all the attributes that I said that he brings to the table, as well as what was going against him in Chicago and a terrible lineup. In case you guys have been living under a rock, the Chicago White Sox are terrible in more ways than one. They make the Mets look good, and that's a really hard thing to do. As a Mets fan, I say that, obviously. I'm only half joking for the most part. To go from that kind of organization that's so behind the 8-ball analytically, that's so behind on their offensive approach, to now entering a Mets offense that has Troy Snitker at the helm, the longtime hitting coach, the multi-time World Series champion hitting coach, with the Astros cheating scandal aside, because he started being their hitting coach after the scandal became public, mind you. You're bringing a great mind like him to pair with Robert and to bring in all the other people that we have in this lineup. I'm telling you guys, don't be surprised. Be ready for when you see a guy like Luis Robert go out of his way to be as effective as you could possibly see in ways that we really have not heard in a while. Heard Bellinger has all the offers and he's going to decide. I'm sure we'll have a Bellinger decision sometime tomorrow or the day after with the way that things are trending, obviously. But nonetheless, everybody, this is massive news for the Mets to bring in a player like this for what they gave up. That's another thing that I cannot emphasize enough. It's one thing to trade for Luis Robert. It's another when you gave up the assets that the Mets did. And someone said in the chat, and Eugenio Suarez is absolutely a bat I would keep an eye out for if the Mets don't land Bellinger, okay? Because you may argue that the Mets could be more in the market for a lefty bat now after bringing in Robert. You could almost argue that they're not really lefty heavy anymore, right? Because when you look at the configuration of the offense, you have Juan Soto, Lindor, who's going to bat a lot from the left side, and Brett Baty if he gets playing time. But outside of that, you don't have a lot. Jorge Polanco's a switch hitter, so I should bear that in mind too. But I'm just saying, like, we went from this being a very lefty-heavy lineup to now you could argue that the Mets could be in need of a lefty bat here. And this is what I will say. If the Mets don't land Cody Bellinger, is it possible that they trade for a profile like Lars Nootbaar? So I really think that is still a potential for this club. If they're going to still add an outfielder, I don't know how much of a great possibility is that they're going to land someone like Bellinger now. I think it's more pessimistic than optimistic if you're asking for my honest opinion. But I do think that given the fact that his ceiling is still as low as it is, his floor rather, in Robert, that the Mets simply cannot take the risk of banking on a certainty that Carson Bench will be the guy and that Robert will have a dominant season. Because if just one of those things does not pan out the way that you're hoping, you're already looking at a loss to begin the season. And that's something that David Stearns needs to present to the Mets and say, okay, we cannot have that. So even if you, again, and I don't love the profile, but even if you see landing like an Austin Hayes, he probably makes no sense now after landing Robert. I'm just trying to connect the dots here and saying that it makes logical sense for the Mets to still land another outfielder even after bringing in Robert. They only have 4 outfielders on paper, the organization currently, including a prospect. So you really need to think for a second what makes most sense for this team. And what I think makes most sense is that you add another outfielder, regardless as to what quality of a player they're going to be, to give you more certainty what you have. And everyone's spamming in the chat. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I understand the Mets need pitching. There is no doubt about that. The good news is that the Mets will add pitching. That's a pinky promise. That will happen this offseason. It's just a matter of when, not if. Now, that's cracking me up. Okay, let's get to the splits, everybody. When we look at the splits for Mr. Luis Robert versus right-handed pitching, a 601 OPS versus left-handed pitching, an 842 OPS this past season. So again, he needs to work on that game. Wow, yeah, he was looking really good. He was looking like 30+% above league average against Southpaws this past season. Looked really, really good in that regard. Now, beyond that, let's get into some other numbers here. Let's see how he looks with runners in scoring position, that kind of stuff. This stuff that I think is important. Okay. All right, guys, here it is. Here's the following. With runners in scoring position. Oh, baby. That's what we love to see. Okay. So I may have initially cut things off for my replay viewers, but I'm going to like uncut it and make sure this part of the segment is in at the 43-minute mark of me going and doing this right now, because we're looking at the splits of Luis Robert from the 2025 season. And for a player that obviously has struggled quite a bit offensively, he was tremendous against Southpaws, where he batted to an 840 plus OPS and had an OPS plus that we saw well above league average. We're looking at least 30 to, if not 50% above league average. That's really, really good. Secondly, Luis Robert with runners in scoring position in 75 games this past season. You want to know his stats? A 272 batting average, a 381 on base, a 326 slug. So the power wasn't there for Robert, but great contact and on-base ability. He had a really, really good eye at the plate when he was dealing with runners in scoring position. And that's really encouraging to see, because that was not something that I was initially expecting. Now, when we get into more of the clutch numbers for Luis Robert, take a look at the following. 2 outs, runners in scoring position, 250 batting average, 400 on base percentage, and a 306 slug. So it all comes down to, can he get this power back, especially in those clutch moments? Because clearly, he's had a very good approach at the plate to still get himself on base while playing for the sorry Chicago White Sox. Late and close in ball games, terrible numbers for him this past season. Tie ball game, looking at a 760 OPS and a 247 average and a 378 on base. Not bad. So I actually not complaining about that. You want a guy that's going to step up in a tight ball game, no doubt. So when we look at high leverage for Luis Robert this past season, not the sexiest numbers. Medium leverage, tremendous. So basically when he was just in a normal setting for a baseball game, there's nothing crazy happening. One way or another, he was at his best, batting just under 280 with an OPS that we saw of 755. And low leverage, he didn't do well, but that's okay because, again, it's low leverage. So now when we look at a bit more on Luis Robert and talking about what he's going to bring to the New York Mets here, the final thing that I'll say on this front that I'm going to pull up, because I know SNY posted this not long ago when the news initially broke here, is as follows, everybody. Let's go ahead and pull this up. Luis Robert has one career home run at Citi Field, blasting this 405 feet on July 19th of 2023. Now, July 19th, 2023, I'm just going to double check on my phone quick to make sure I wasn't at that game, because I was at the one game that Bo Bichette hit a home run at Citi Field against the Mets. I was there in 2021 in July against the Blue Jays. So I'm just curious, was I at this Luis Robert game in 2023 by chance? I got to go through my absurd camera roll of way too many photos real quick. Oh my God, I was at this game. Shut up. Shut up. Wait, was I? If this was the game that Justin Verlander pitched, I was there. Hold on, because I was at one game in 2023 against the White Sox. It was Justin Verlander's best start ever as a New York Met. He went 8 dominant innings for us, and I believe that was his last start before being traded, or his second to last. On the 19th? Shut up! I was there on the 19th! There is not a... Granted, that's completely inaccurate. I know I'm not the only Mets fan that's been at this. But what are the odds that the only home runs ever hit by Bo Bichette and Luis Robert at Citi Field, I was in attendance for both those games. I was there sitting on the Toronto Blue Jays side on the left side of the infield, so third base side, in July of 2021. And I was also there, and I'm not, and to anyone that thinks I'm BSing, let me enlighten you. Look at that date. July 19th, 2023. Look at the photo. Bam. That was a great day, too. Went on an awesome date. Yeah, Wardy went on a date at the Citi Field that day, and it was literally tremendous. Everything was perfect. But hold on. That's so sick. I love that. That's really, really cool. So that's the final thing I'll probably show for our replay viewers before I cut things off.